the law.
Good morning, Chair.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Are we ready?
We are ready, Chair, and apologies for the slight delay. The computers were giving technical problems this morning, but we believe we have sorted it out and are able to approach Mr. Chabi's evidence in the manner that we had originally envisaged.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, you'll recall...
I guess we'll have to start afresh with his evidence.
Yes, I'm going to make a suggestion in that regard,
yes.
Subject, of course, to what the Chair, how the Chair views it.
Yeah.
Just to place on record for whoever will be reading this transcript in time to come, we presented Mr. Chabi for the first time on the 29th of May 2019. And at the end of that day, his testimony was postponed to a later date, and that date, in effect, is today. At the point of presenting Mr. Chabi, he tendered a certain set of slides, and with the leave of the Chair, these were marked Exhibit BB 8B. BB 8B, the slides admitted into evidence, are in respect of two transactions, 1064 and transaction 100 respectively. There are two separate sets of slides. Following a request by the Chair for statements, Mr. Chabi has since now prepared a statement in each case for 1064 and 100, consistent with the slides to the extent possible, and these are being submitted today. Chair, we have placed before you a file. Because the statements directly relate to the exhibit, we have sought to find a way to link the statements to the exhibit. We suggest, therefore, that the file also be marked Exhibit 8B, except we suggest each statement in turn be BB8B1 and BB8B2. And the file before the Chair should have both statements. There is a divider in the file. The first divider would be marked 1, and that relates to the 1064 transaction. The second divider is marked 2, and that would be in respect of the 100 transaction.
Does 2 have a yellow divider?
Yes, it has a...
Oh, no, not on mine.
Not on yours?
Yes. They must make sure what I have is exactly the same as what you have, and what the witness has is exactly the same.
Sometimes because they run out of...
You should be able to say it's a white, yellow, blue divider, and when I go there I must find that color. You mustn't have a yellow divider and I have a green divider.
We will bring that to the attention,
so
Chair.
it just makes things easy, because you see, for example, now I saw that the first divider, number 1, is yellow. So I'm looking for another yellow that has got 2, because that's how normally it goes. But actually, you probably have a yellow number 2 and I've got a green number 2.
And it gets more interesting than that, because I have a green number 1 and a yellow number 2.
You see?
Yes, Chair.
But the people who do these things might not appreciate the importance of these things. So they need to be told that the files must be exactly the same, so that when we are looking for any document, we have exactly the same thing.
No, we appreciate that, Chair, and we definitely will be communicating, so this mistake will not happen again.
Yeah, okay.
For purposes of today, and we will update your file accordingly.
Yes.
But most importantly, you've got 2 dividers there, one marked 1 and the other marked 2.
Yeah.
So insofar as 1 is concerned, if the Chair could just recall, that is in respect of 1064, and 2 is in respect of 100.
Yeah, okay.
And we will deal with each transaction in turn.
Yes, okay, okay.
Getting back then to the issue that the Chair raised at the beginning of our presentation, about how we intend to approach this. On the 29th of May, when Mr. Chabi first appeared, he dealt with the preliminaries about himself, introduced himself, his background, professional qualifications and experience, and he had started some of his actual evidence. If the chair has regard to BB8B1, at page 1, that's where the statement starts, those aspects are dealt with until page 5. Although he had started on his actual testimony evidence before you,
Yes.
we suggest the following, that it is not necessary for Mr. Chabi to replace his qualifications and those issues on record as they already are on record, but we restart his actual evidence. Just so
Yeah.
it is in a single transcript.
Yes, no,
Yes.
that's fine. That's fine. The qualifications are already there.
Yes, Chair.
So I'm quite happy with him starting afresh in regard to the evidence.
In regard to the evidence.
Yeah.
Thank
yeah.
you, Chair. And we propose to do
Yeah,
so.
okay.
Just lastly, Chair, as is custom, perhaps you must admit the file into evidence with the proposed marking.
Yes, the file, large file containing the statement by Mr. Alister Chabi is going to be admitted as Exhibit BB8. And what falls under 1 are his statement and certain annexures, is that right?
Under 1 is a statement and annexures in respect of 1064.
Yeah. And under 2?
And under 2 is his statement and relevant annexures in respect of 100.
Yes, okay. Then his statement appearing from page 1 under divider 1 and the annexures that come after that but before divider 2 will be admitted as Exhibit BB8B1.
Thank you, Chair.
And his statement under divider 2 and the annexures thereto will be admitted as Exhibit BB8B2.
Thank you, Chair.
Did we get it right?
We got it right.
Okay, all
Thank you,
right.
If I may just mention then, for the benefit of those who will read subsequently, to distinguish between the numbering, 1064 is numbered AOC 101064 and page number. And that is in a bid to distinguish it from 100, which is numbered, the numbering range there is AOC, which are his initial 101.
Yes, remember.
So there's a middle number.
Yes, 1064 being a reference to 1064 locomotives.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And 100 as well.
Yeah.
Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Starting then with 1064. Before we do so, we haven't sworn in the witness.
Yes,
if I may request that the witness be sworn
we
in.
must administer the oath of affirmation first.
Please state your full names for the record.
My full name is Alister Chabi.
Do you have any objection to taking the prescribed oath?
I do not.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
I do.
Do you swear that the evidence you will give will be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you, Chair.
Now, Ms. Silo, I want us to begin this evidence in a certain way,
Yes,
which
Chair.
I think will help me.
Indeed.
I don't know about you. You might be an expert on this thing already.
That will be the day.
So, Mr. Chabi, I want you to listen to what I'm going to say. Ms. Silo is also listening. I'm going to tell you how I would like us to start with your evidence, and you can tell me if you think we can do it that way from your point of view, and Ms. Silo will say something if she wants to say something also. This is not so easy to follow stuff. I'm sure you are saying, but this is nothing. It's simple. It's got its complexities for somebody who is not in this field, certainly for me, but I would like to follow it. Now, what would help me is if we were to start with you telling me what the general principles are that apply when you do what you were asked to do, generally speaking. To say generally, these are the principles that would be applicable in this field if you are going to do this. This is what this principle means. This is what this principle means. This is what this principle means. And then once I understand the general principles, then when you go to the application of those principles to what was before you, to what is before us, then I would follow much better. Now, in your statement, there are certain things that I see as possibly principles. So let me make you an example from a lawyer's point of view. Let me make an example about employment or any contract. There would be two parties, and the contract would talk about what they have agreed, who will do what are the rights and obligations of the parties. When do you have a breach of the contract? And if there is a breach of the contract, what rights does the other party have? What remedies does it have? When is there a breach? Where is there no breach? Let me make an example in regard to the contract. The lawyers in the room will understand this, but you will understand it too. For example, in the law of contract, there is a principle which is the principle of reciprocity, which means that in regard to certain matters in a contract, if you are supposed to do something, a certain thing, before I have to do something else, or if you must do something for me before I can do something for you, if you don't do your part, I'm under no obligation to do my part. You understand that? So you can't not fulfill your obligation but expect me to fulfill my obligation. If you don't fulfill your part, you are in breach. But I'm not in breach by not doing my part, because I'm only in breach if you have done your part. You understand that? Let me make you another example with contracts. If we have a contract and I want to terminate the contract there are two possibilities. I can terminate the contract by giving you a notice that says, for example, I will terminate this contract on such and such a date, and I give you about a month or 3 months, depending what the contract says. That's the notice period. But I may also terminate the contract summarily without giving you notice and say, with immediate effect, this contract is cancelled. If, as a general principle, you are in a serious breach of the contract, we call it a repudiation of the contract, I can summarily cancel it. But if you are not in breach of the contract, I must give you notice. You understand? So if you look at it if I explain this to somebody who is not a lawyer, then having explained this, I can then say, well, let's go to the facts of this case. Okay, was there a breach? No, there was no breach, so therefore there is supposed to have been a notice before the contract was cancelled. Was there a breach? If there was a breach, there was no obligation to give notice. It could be cancelled immediately. So if I understand those principles, it's easier to then go and say, okay, what happened here? How does it fit into the general principles? And there may be exceptions, that this is a general principle, but there are exceptions. Now, I don't know whether within your field it's possible to explain things like that, but I would imagine that it ought to be possible. But I'm not an actuary, so I don't know. So tell me, is this going to be easy, or is it difficult, or what do you think?
Okay, yes, I'm trying to marry, I think, the principles you've just mentioned to what
Sorry,
would be considered.
Mr. Chabi,
Yeah, I
please
don't
put
know
the
what's
mic
happening. Yeah,
closer
maybe bring
towards you.
it
It's
closer
not,
so I can hear you.
Thank you.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So I tried to follow as you went along and tried to jot down notes. Would I be asking for much if I asked about some of the terms you did not understand, so I can go through that at a high level?
Well, certainly, one of the things that I would like you to do is to say, here are terms that I will be using in my evidence, which are important to understand in order to follow the evidence. I mean, like in my example of a contract and talking about repudiation, I would explain what repudiation means, and I would explain what summary termination of a contract means, that kind of thing. So if we have an explanation of those important terms, then it helps also to understand, because one can, as the evidence proceeds, one can go back and say, okay, this is what this one means.
Okay, Chair, that's, I think I understand you. I have, off the top of my head, picked up a few terms that I think will be pertinent in this submission, and I think some of them are ETC.
Yes.
Chair, if I may.
Yes. What's your input here? Give me your input.
It's not so much input. One thing I still have to do.
Yeah.
Place on record. Mr. Chabi has to confirm that this is his statement.
Yes.
And that he stands by it, because now we have gone into the statement itself. That
Yes.
is the one aspect we hadn't done.
Yes. No, I don't want him to go there. I was
Because he was
just
beginning to answer your...
Yeah, I don't want you to start explaining any terms.
Okay.
I just wanted to find out whether, having heard what I've said, you think for you it would be easy to do that or not. That's what I wanted. Then once we are done, then we can start.
I think I can explain a few of the terms used in the business, in the submission. Yes, I can, Chair.
It's doable.
It is doable.
Okay, all right. And how do you feel about it?
Chair, It
Or you
would
think
work.
we are in actuary 101 and you are already in 103?
Oh, 001.
I'm at zero.
Chair, I think the structure of the statement, we have attempted to capture in part what the chair is suggesting. And perhaps as I speak, Mr. Chabi may apply his mind to it. We are going to work through his evidence in two ways. We are going to work through the slides, which summarize the key parts of his evidence. And then with the slide up on the screen, we then work through the detail of what is on the screen, item by item. We have in the statement set out what his mandate was, what he understood his mandate to be. And then we have said that is followed by a fairly detailed methodology. My view is that in dealing with those two issues, he would begin to develop this glossary of terms that will be important and will consistently be applied throughout the statement. So that's why I say somewhere between the statement and what the chair is suggesting might just answer the chair's question or concern.
Yes, no, that's fine. But that explanation of important terms at the beginning is important even before you go into much. It may be that it doesn't have to be all the terms that will come across during the course of your evidence, but certain important ones, and then we move on.
And I think, Chair, Ms. Mulife will keep a running list for us here.
Yes.
Of the terms and how Mr. Chabi defines them.
Yeah.
And we will type them out and in time update the chair's file.
Yeah.
With this glossary of terms.
Yeah.
So as we go along, then perhaps as we come across a new term,
yes,
then we will help define it before we deal with it.
Yeah. No, that's fine. As long as the important ones, you start with that and deal with them after you have confirmed, give me those, and then the list will not be exhaustive. As you will go on and more come up, then you can deal with them and explain them as we go along. But certain important ones, I think it's important for us to do it that way.
Now, if I may then...
Maybe if you are a good teacher, Mr. Chabi, by end of today, we will be ready for Actuary 103.
We will be. Just to check with Mr. Chabi through you, Chair,
yeah,
whether he understood the request regarding the principles applicable. Would you be able, off the top of your head, before we go into the detail of 1064 and 100, to deal in high level with those principles for the chair?
I picked up a few pertinent ones I thought were pertinent. I can list them.
You'll
and then
be
you
able to deal with them.
tell me if they're sufficient.
Okay. No, then we're well.
Okay. Sorry, I think let them switch off the aircon. When you speak,
voice.
I don't hear you as clearly as I should, and I don't know if it's the aircon. So, but they will switch it off for now.
May I suggest, there are some files to your left, Mr. Chabi. Please take one and put the mic on the file. Then perhaps we raise the mic. That might improve audibility. I'm not promising it will. And then raise the mic such that at least pull it closer to you, raise it.
Am I audible now?
Not as much.
Just say something again.
Hello?
May I inquire from the technicians whether there's something we can...
Yeah, can the
That's the best we can do.
technicians... Do the technicians, know if
say,
everything is perfect? They say everything is perfect.
I think this is the best they can do. So,
yeah.
Mr. Chabi, from time to time, I'll request you to raise your voice.
Okay.
And I think you can put the mic closer to you as well. You need to be comfortable. You're going to be in that chair for quite some time.
Does that work better?
Yeah.
I think move it away a little bit. I think it's too close.
And now?
I think that seems better.
Okay.
The message we get back from the technicians is that the aircon is interfering with the sound, so perhaps it's better
Well, I asked
switched
them
off.
to switch it off.
Should it become unbearably hot, we'll switch it on again at least
we
for some
might change
time.
it, Yeah,
Thank you, Chair.
okay, all right.
Now, we are ready to start. Mr. Chabi, you have to your left a file. If you look at the spine, it's written Exhibit BB8B1 and Exhibit BB8B2. Right? Now, you had my discussion with the chair that that file is divided in two parts. The first part is under tab 1, and the second part is under tab 2. Now, let's start with tab 1.
Ms. Silo, I just want to say this because I've been reminded of it.
Yes, Chair.
You know, I think the legal team should try and make sure that all files, leave out files that are handed up, on the outside, on the spine,
They
they are
identify the
written
transaction.
what work stream, like this one should have Transnet. So when there are 50 files, I can know these are Transnet, so I don't have to look at any one of them if I'm
Indeed.
looking for Denel file, a Denel
Indeed.
file. So Transnet, Denel, ESCOM, yeah, because otherwise, sometimes I might not remember that Mr. Chabi gave evidence in regard to Transnet many months from now.
Indeed, Chair. No,
Yeah.
we fully understand. We will update the,
And share the
spine.
information with the legal team.
yes, and
Yeah.
we will
Okay.
circulate that, Chair. Thank you. Now, at tab 1, there is a pile of documents there. If you turn to page 1 or under that tab, do you find it? There is a document that runs up to page 50. Now, do you confirm that that is the statement you
Please
prepared?
switch on your mic.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And before I forget, you can keep your mic on. It doesn't interfere with the other mics.
Thank you.
So it runs up to page 50. Do you confirm that is the statement you prepared for the commission?
I do.
And the signature appearing at 50 is your signature.
It is.
That statement has got 5 annexures to it, and that will run to just before tab 2. They are flagged 1 to 5.
Actually, the statement is an affidavit I see at the end.
Correct, so
Yes,
it has been
yes.
commissioned. It's an
Yeah.
actual affidavit, yes.
Happy?
And you confirm that those are the annexures to your statement?
I do.
You stand by what is stated in the statement?
I do.
Are there any changes, significant amendments and changes you'd like to make to the statement at this time before it's fully admitted? Or are you happy with it, barring perhaps a typographical error here, or
At this point, no.
you are happy with the statement? Okay. Then, with that confirmation, the chair permitted that you don't deal with matters set out in paragraphs 1.1 to 1.14. These speak to your qualifications, your experience, and the like, because those had you previously placed on record when you appeared on the 29th of May. You recall that. So by right, our plan was to start from page 5 and item 2, and the heading is mandate. Okay. But before we do so, the chair has made a request to you. The first is to highlight the key principles that are applicable in the exercise that you conducted. And the second would be to identify those key terms that are relevant to our discussion today. So let's start with the principles.
Okay. Thanks, Advocate. So, Chair, a few words I have picked up for purposes of definition are ETC, I think that occurs a number of times within the statement. NPV, net
ETC.
ETC.
Yes, yeah.
It appears.
May I just interject? I had said we start with principles. It sounds like you're dealing with terms.
Terms, correct.
Okay. I'm happy that you do so, just for the record, to be clear. You're
Yes,
first dealing with
yes,
terms.
yeah.
Then we'll get to the principles thereafter.
Well,
Okay.
I took terms to be
The principles.
the principles in this instance, yes. And the
Okay,
chair.
I'm sorry. I don't know whether it's your voice. Maybe it's not, maybe it's your voice. Maybe you need to speak a little slower, I'm not sure, and a little louder. Maybe this microphone doesn't want me to hear what you have to say. So let's see how it goes.
How it goes, okay.
Yeah.
So I took terms to mean principles in this instance, because as per my understanding, I think the difficulty is around the terms used in the business case. What do these terms actually mean?
Well, you need to explain the essential important terms, but I also would like you to say these are the principles. And it may be that the terms that are important to understand are linked to certain principles. And if that is the case, you are welcome to say, well, ETC, this is what it stands for. There is some principle or a principle that's connected with it, and this is what it is, and so on. So how you deal with it, I want to give you flexibility as long as in the end I've got that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I hope the principles come out as I define the terms.
Okay.
Hopefully we'll. Okay, so the terms I have picked up are ETC, NPV being net present value, escalation, that appears also quite a number of times in the document, forex hedging, so foreign currency risk hedging, I think hurdle rate may be another.
Okay. Then just briefly speak to each one of them,
Okay.
starting with ETC.
ETC. Okay. I'd like to mention that as we carry on with the statement, I will continue to emphasize the definition.
Yes, well, whatever you have done now is working, because I can hear you quite well now.
Okay.
So stick to it.
All right, Chair. Okay. So starting off with ETC, what is ETC? It stands for Estimated Total Cost. In very simple terms, and one of the slides speaks to it, it is the summation.
Estimated
Total
costs.
cost. Yeah.
Yes.
It is the total or the sum of the cost of acquiring locomotives in each of the years over the delivery period. Could be 5, 6, 7 years. In this instance, in the business case, it was 7 years. So each year in those 7 years, there was a cost to acquiring locomotives. ETC simply takes the summation of those costs.
If the locomotives were to be acquired all at the same time, is the position that you would not have ETC because you wouldn't have to estimate anything. You would have total costs, and you would know what they are, because you're talking about acquiring the locomotives. You know how many they are. You know how much each is. You know on what date you will receive them. Delivery will happen. You know what the transport cost will be for them to be transported from China or wherever to South Africa. Therefore, you will know the total costs and not an estimated total cost. Would that be correct to understand it that way?
Okay. So if the locomotives had to be acquired all at the same time, you would still have ETC. Reason being, in the business case, assumptions had to be made about the price of the diesel and the electric locomotive. That the assumptions on the price the OEMs would charge, OEM in this instance being original equipment manufacturer. So it is still an estimate because you do not know at the time of writing the business case what the manufacturers will charge you for the locomotives.
Because there is the process of manufacturing.
Not because they're in the process of manufacturing, but because they haven't given you a price for the locomotives. So you'd only know at contract stage, I would say, what they're actually charging you per locomotive.
But ETC would not apply to something that you can go and buy and take delivery of immediately.
It should not, no.
It should not.
You would know the cost if you can actually go out.
Because
right?
you look and you see what the
cost is.
What the price is. Maybe it is something that will require you to hire a certain mode of transport to take it to your factory or home. You then know what the cost of taking that will be, and if that were to be the case, would that come under total cost as well, or would total cost be limited to the purchase price?
Purchase price. It would be limited to the purchase price.
You would include it?
No. Total cost in this instance would be limited to the purchase price.
Oh, okay.
So we actually cover those details as we look through the model,
Yes.
looking at where ETC actually falls in the whole list of costs.
Yes. It may be that I'm thinking of something else in your statement, I think, which has got ownership costs and so on.
Total cost of ownership, yes.
Yeah.
So that's
yeah.
ETC,
Yes.
including other costs.
Okay, because maybe when we come to that, and you will talk about that at the right time, as I was thinking about it, if I have to go and buy a certain article which requires me to hire a special vehicle that must take it to my factory, then in order for me to own that article and be able to use it, I have to incur the transport cost to take it from where I bought it to where I need to use it.
Correct. So the cost of operationalizing the equipment does not form part of the ETC.
Oh, okay. No, thank you. Yes, you may continue.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. You may continue, Mr. Chabi. And perhaps at this juncture, following on the Chair's questions, you might want to very briefly tabulate those factors that make up ETC.
Okay. So ETC, as we will discuss as well again later, is the purchase price of the locomotive, inflation on the price.
What on the price?
Inflation on the price.
Okay.
In fact, that's what we refer to as escalation in the statement. Okay, so escalation is synonymous with inflation in this instance. Foreign currency, hedging costs, and contingencies. So essentially those four items make up ETC. In the business case, you have a 2% localization premium that's included as part of the locomotive price.
Okay, thank you. So now you have defined ETC.
And in part, escalation, I suppose, inflation.
Okay, and you've said your next was escalation, which you said that's synonymous with inflation.
Yes.
Correct. It's purely
So we
just
should-
inflation on the price that you'd have been quoted earlier.
Yes.
So the price today is not the price a year from today.
Yes.
And that difference is what we refer to as inflation. Most instances, we get price increases or not price decreases.
You mentioned NPV.
NPV. And I think before I go into NPV, it's important to discuss what PV is, which is simply present value. It is the value, it's the current value, the value in today's terms. as I mentioned earlier, the price today is not the price in a year's time. However, the price in a year's time can be discounted to give you a price today, if that makes sense, and it's discounted at a certain rate. That rate is termed the discount rate. And normally with projects, it is determined from a detailed risk assessment of the project. So you assess the risk within the project and you arrive at a discount rate to quantify that risk, and that discount rate is then used to bring your cash flows back to current terms. In the case of the business, in the instance of the business case, it is 18 April 2013. So if we talk about present value, in the context of the business case, we're referring to 18 April 2013.
Okay.
And when we talk of the NPV, and please state what NPV stands for in full.
Okay, so NPV stands for net present value. In very simple terms, it gives an idea of the profit you're likely to make from the project. So you value your income, or should I say your revenue, in today's terms, and so that's the present value of everything you expect to receive from the project. Okay, all cash flows coming in. You also value your expenses in present value terms, and by present value terms I mean 18 April 2013 in the concept of the business case. The difference between the two gives you your net present value, so it's essentially the present value of your revenue net the present value of your costs, and it gives an idea of your profit.
Okay. Then you made mention of forex hedging.
Okay, so hedging essentially is a transaction you undertake to eliminate risk. Academics will talk of partial elimination and so forth, but in the context of Transnet.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chabi. Can you speak a little away from the mic? I want to see when it is that I hear you quite well and when it is that I can't hear you so well. Just speak from that distance. Let me hear.
Is it better now?
I think it's better.
It's better, okay.
Yeah.
All right, and I think I was on foreign currency hedging. Okay, so hedging essentially allows you to eliminate.
Yeah, that's certainly better. You leave that distance, yeah.
So hedging simply implies elimination of risk. In the context of Transnet, it's elimination of risk, and now we're talking about foreign currency risk hedging. So a transaction you undertake to eliminate foreign currency risk in the sense that you do not want to subject yourselves to fluctuations in the foreign currency in the future. So you want to be, sorry.
So it's protection against risk.
Correct, it's insurance.
Yeah, okay.
Against fluctuation in exchange rate.
In exchange rate risks. So you know today what you're going to pay for that currency in a year's time, in 2 years' time, in 3 years' time, and so forth. That's the point of hedging. So if you hedge, you're getting rid of your upside. In other words, if the currency does well, you don't benefit from it. If it does poorly, you also do not suffer from it.
All right. So far we've got the four definitions. Any other term you can think of currently that perhaps you might want to highlight?
I think at this point not, but as we carry on, if they come up,
Yes,
I think we can deal with them.
Okay, that's fine.
Chair, now turning to you, if I may, I don't know whether what we have just done in part answers the question, the issue of principles that the chair posed, or perhaps those will be clarified as we go along.
I suspect it doesn't, because it's just an explanation of the terms without saying it comes about because there is this principle or this term arises because of this problem, and the principle that applies in regard to this problem is the following. So, but I don't want to make anything difficult. If from your point of view, you think there are some principles that you can deal with now, or it's easier to deal with them as we go along, that's fine. How do you feel?
So I would opt for dealing with them as we go along.
Okay, all right.
That's right.
Then I would suggest, Chair, with your leave, that we deal with the mandate and the methodology, and we take stock thereafter.
Yes,
and
okay.
see whether we've been able to clarify any pertinent principles.
Yes, okay.
For that purpose, Chair, I would request that you tend to page 5 of the statement at paragraph 2, and have open next to you, if you may, Chair, that the presentation, slide 2.
Is that going to be here?
Yes, it is BB 8B.
Did I not confuse things when I was admitting this?
We indicated that BB 8B are the slides.
Oh,
Then
okay,
we have
this is 1 and 2.
1 and 2.
Yes, okay. But has this been admitted previously?
It was admitted on the
Oh.
29th of May.
Okay, okay. So I go to page 5 of the statement, but I have available to me, I have to look at what page of
Yeah, we will be working,
slides?
but currently what is at
2,
page 5 of the statement, paragraph 2, is the mandate.
yeah.
And perhaps as we speak through the mandate, we might be able to clarify some of the principles. Please have regard to your paragraph 2 at page 5. Mr. Chabi, you set out under paragraph 2 the mandate that you had obtained from MNS. Can we deal with what specifically you were required to do? And we do so in respect of each issue you were requested to look into.
Certainly, Advocate.
Yes.
Should I take you through the mandate?
Yes, please, let's talk of your mandate. We can cross-refer to your original mandate, which is also an annexure to your statement. But let's just talk about the mandate. What was required of you to do?
Okay. So maybe some context, I suppose, is
Yes.
important here. And we will deal with it a bit later, I suppose, when we look at the increase in ETC. So a memorandum was presented to the Transnet Board of Directors on the 23rd of May 2014, justifying or requesting an increase in the ETC from 38.6 billion to 54.5 billion. So there were reasons set out and quantums laid out next to those reasons to explain, to justify the 15.9 billion rand increase in ETC. So MNS, in the course of its investigations, asked all 5 holdings to look through the reasons put forward, assess those reasons for reasonability, look through the quantums set out next to the reasons, also assess those quantums for reasonability, and not only that, to go back to the 38.6 billion and determine.
Just raise your
You lost
voice
me a bit,
again
okay.
and move away. Maybe you can move the mic a little bit further from you. I know we said you must bring it closer, but each time I'm gauging when I can't hear you well. So, yeah, if you can then just speak a little bit away, but raise your voice again.
Okay. So, just carry on. MNS then asked us, in addition to the reasons put forward for the increase and the quantums set out next to those reasons, to go back to the 38.6 billion. So that's the initial ETC presented to the board, and determine if that ETC of 30.6 billion is reasonable, is justifiable. So in other words, looking through the variables, looking through the assumptions, and I suppose at this point I should explain what variables and assumptions are. A variable is any quantity that can take that varies. Essentially, it's pretty much that. So in this instance, when you're looking at revenue has certain subcomponents. You have to make assumptions on those components. For example, the tariff, we will speak to that a bit later. That is a variable because that number can be anything. In fact, it varies from year to year, as we will see. The volumes are also a variable. They change from year to year. Okay, so when we talk about variables, we talk about those line items. Okay, so we look at revenue, and revenue has its own set of variables. Costs also have their own sets of variables. Escalation is also a variable in this instance. Forex hedging is also a variable because forex hedging changes depending on when you actually contract or decide to hedge. I think that's a better term. So the mandate was to go and look at those variables within the 38.6 billion business case, the business case relating to that ETC. Assess those variables for reasonability, The assumption is the value you assign to the variable. So inflation being a variable, the assumption is the rate that you plug into that variable. 5% would be the assumption in this instance, if 5% is the rate that you assign to inflation. So that is the difference between variable and assumption in this instance. So we're required to assess both.
So then you are informed and are given supporting documentation that the board approved a 38.6 billion ETC.
Correct, Advocate.
You are requested to evaluate that ETC and
Correct.
test the reasonability of the variables and the assumptions of the 38.6 billion.
Correct.
To confirm or otherwise that the values attached to every factor that make up 38.6 billion are reasonable and are correct.
Correct.
Having done that, you are then requested to compare that 38.6 billion ETC with the newly approved ETC of 54 billion.
Correct.
And conduct the same exercise in respect of 54 billion
Correct.
as you did with the 38.6 billion ETC, and express a view, therefore, whether the difference between 15.4 billion was justified, 15.9 billion was justified in the circumstances.
Billion, yes.
Thank you. That was your mandate.
That was the mandate, yes.
Now, at paragraph 2.2, overleaf at page 6, you then introduce another transaction, and this is the 100. You do confirm that annexure AC1 is your written mandate from MNS, and your AC1 will appear at page 51.
Correct, Advocate.
Now, a reading of AC1 would seem to indicate that that particular written mandate is in respect of 1064 only.
Correct.
Now, into your paragraph 2.2, you now speak of...
I'm sorry.
Yes, Chair?
When you said AC1,
It's annexure AC1.
yeah. no.
Apologies. Annexure
La-
AC1.
Later on, you said when you read AC1, it sounds like 81. So I was wondering.
I
if-
should
because
remember to
the
say.
page is 52.
Annexure
Okay.
AC1.
I don't know
and
what the
page-
technology is doing to us today. Yes, okay, yes,
And that starts at page 52, as the
Yeah.
Chair points out.
okay.
The point I was making to Mr. Chabi is that annexure AC1, that written mandate, is specific to the 1064 transaction. At his statement, paragraph 2.2, he, however, introduces the other transaction, and I would like him to explain what
Yeah.
he would like the Chair to understand by what
Yeah.
is set out in paragraph 2.2.
Okay. So during MNS's investigation of the 1064 locomotive transaction, they came across the 100 locomotive transaction, if that's the right word to use.
Has
It's
it become
not audible again.
hot?
Horrible.
Is it hot?
It is getting hot.
Is that so? But
It's okay, Chair, I'll
with your,
manage.
with
It's
your
fine.
jacket off, it's manageable.
It should be fine, yes.
Okay, all right. Yeah. No, it's just that when the aircon is on, it makes
It interferes
it
with the-
more difficult to hear you. But we will see as we go on if it becomes too hot for everyone.
Well, Chair, it would appear it's okay for everybody. It must have something to do with that seat.
It is the seat.
Yes.
Okay. So during MNS's investigations of the 1064 locomotives transaction, they came across the 100, and I think that was added onto their mandate from Transnet. They then asked us, as all five holding, to look into the 100 with the same mandate from the 1064. However, the validation of the initial ETC was not part of the mandate of the 100 locomotives mandate. So if I can clarify that, with the 1064 locomotives, we had to validate the 38.6 billion and then look at the increase. With 100, the mandate was to look at the increase and not validate the initial 3.8 billion.
And this you call the extension of the mandate, and it's correct to say that that extension was not in writing.
It was not.
It was verbal, communicated directly to you
Correct.
by a partner of MNS.
Correct.
And you confirm that you understood the mandate correctly?
I believe I do.
And you
I
have
did,
since
sorry.
you have since submitted a report specific to that mandate.
I did.
Thank you. You proceed then, and you suggest that you will deal with each transaction in turn at your paragraph 2.3. Now, we are dealing specifically with 1064. We will come back at a later point to come deal with 100. You have set out in very brief terms the methodology that you employed in this investigation, or in both investigations, in fact. And this you set out in your paragraph 3. Without necessarily reading everything that you set out in paragraph 3, please highlight the key aspects of the methodology.
So methodology here simply refers to the information that we used to assist us in the investigation and the exercises that we conducted to test our own analysis of the work that we undertook. So we got a range of documents from M&S to assist us with this financial investigation, some of them being the best and final offer price letters, the various memoranda that appeared, well, memorandums that were relevant to the business case, the various business cases as well, and other reports produced by the Transnet officials while assessing the transaction with the OEMs. We also had to source information, of course, outside of M&S and Transnet to validate the assumptions to the variables applied within the business case. And some of those, sites from which we sourced the information include the South African Reserve Bank. I mean, you've got the US Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics being another, the OECD websites, and so forth. Thomson Reuters being a financial data repository. We then but we then decided to benchmark the approach taken to modeling the various components with what would normally be done in industry to see if, to determine if our approach was actually correct and defendable. We also had to have our work reviewed by an external party, as is required by the chair profession. One of the standards speaks to that, that your work gets reviewed by somebody you deem to have the relevant knowledge, expertise, experience to review your work. Okay. And we also had to conduct, we also approached the market particularly around the foreign currency hedging, so the forex curve, and we'll look at that a little later to determine whether the curve that Transnet applied at the time was what the market would have offered. So in other words, whether forex hedging was applied or not.
Now, if I may ask you about benchmarking, whose work did you benchmark? Is it your work, or is it the business case that was developed by Transnet? What did you subject to benchmarking in this instance?
My work.
Your own work.
Correct.
Okay. Now, then you made mention of peer review. Your statement doesn't state, but what was the outcome of that exercise, of that peer review?
Well, it was signed off. There were a few changes from the reviewer in the results that I obtained. None to the input, none to the methodology, but the results, yes.
So would it be correct to conclude that a sign-off following a peer review is support for your methodology and conclusions as contained in your documentation or in your report?
Correct.
Okay. You then, very briefly before you deal with the detail of the issues you were requested to investigate, you provide a summary of findings. Okay, and that you deal with from your paragraph 4.
Correct.
Because it is going to get a bit technical and at times hairy when you deal with the detail. It might be worth our while to look at your mandate, every aspect of your mandate, and then we have a sense of what your findings were in relation to each mandate. Then we will come deal with how you arrived at that finding. Okay? Now, as we said, your first mandate was is set out at your paragraph 2.1.1, and you say it was to assess the reasonability of the variables and assumptions used in modeling the 18 April 2013 business case. You see that? Now, what was your finding in that regard, in very brief terms?
Okay, so we were happy with the variables and assumptions used within the business case. There were, I suppose, minor changes we would have made to the model, but those changes did not invalidate the outcome of the business case. I guess the result would not have been materially different to what was presented to the board. So we were overall happy with the variables and assumptions. We found
And
them to
that
be acceptable.
finding, sorry, and that finding you make at your paragraph 4.1.1.
Correct.
Correct, okay. Your next then was to assess the accuracy of the ETC of 38.6 billion. And what was the outcome of that?
We were happy with the ETC of 38.6 billion.
So you satisfied yourself that the manner in which the ETC of 38.6 billion was calculated and computed was correct?
So given the definition of what ETC is, it's just a summation of the cost over the various years. We were happy that the ETC provided an acceptable price for the acquisition of the locomotives.
So the 38.6 billion, therefore, is a defensible
Number.
ETC.
ETC,
yeah, or number.
correct, it is.
Okay. And that you set out at 4.1.2. You then state that your next was to identify the reasons for the increase in ETC from 38.6 billion to 54.4 billion, and in doing so, to test the plausibility of the reasons put forward for the 15.9 billion increase in ETC, and to opine on the reasonability of the increase in ETC. And what was your finding in that regard?
Well, there was a need to increase the ETC, but not to the tune of 15.9 billion. So the 15.9 billion in its totality was not justifiable.
Was not
in our view,
justifiable?
yes.
Okay. You deal with other aspects in relation to this issue at 4.1.3. Would you like to quickly highlight those?
Okay, so we concluded an 18% increase in ETC, and that is taking into account Transnet engineering scope. Okay, would have been more acceptable as opposed to the 41% increase that we see in the memorandum. The 38.6, the 15.9 billion is 41% of the 38.6. Okay, so we felt 41% was too large an increase. Should we come to the conclusion that Transnet engineering scope was irregular, an 11% increase would have been more acceptable.
So all in all then, if we look at your mandate, and as you have split it up, it was to look into three issues. Insofar as reasonability of variables and assumptions were concerned, you took no issue with the business case at 38.6 billion.
Correct.
Okay. Secondly, you tested the accuracy of the ATC 38.6 billion, and you considered it to be justifiable or supportable.
Correct.
The only thing you took issue with was the increase effected on the 38.6 billion to create a new ETC of 54.9 billion.
Correct.
So that's the only issue you take. Okay.
I might just qualify something.
Yes.
So in the variables and assumptions, let's bear in mind that the model did not just look at ETC. It looked at a number of other aspects, one of them being the market demand, from the market demand strategy. Now that was outside of our scope. We did, however, go through the model to satisfy ourselves that we understood the mechanics behind the model. So in other words, how the MDS, the market demand was projected over the various years and so forth. So that said, given that we did not interrogate the strategy, we took the 1,064 locomotives as given, as the number of locomotives required. We did not question that.
So you didn't interrogate how the number of 1064 was arrived at?
No.
You accepted that it's 1064 that is intended to be acquired?
Correct.
And yours is to work out the appropriate ETC for the acquisition of the 1064?
Correct.
Okay. Before we then
would it be right to say that that must be natural because you assume that the client knew what their needs were. If they said 1064, it must be that's what they want. Or would it be normal to interrogate that even?
Well, would have liked to interrogate the number. However, as I mentioned, it was beyond our scope. As you mentioned, the client knew what they wanted, 1064. So our departure point was 1064.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. In your statement, we've now come to paragraph 5, where we are dealing with the financial model. But before we do so, and before we shortly break for tea, perhaps we should turn to our glossary of terms and introduce 2 new ones. And it's the business case and the financial model, because they will feature quite regularly going forward. What do you mean by business case? You may keep referencing the business case.
Okay. The business case is essentially the document attached. I think it's in Annexure AC2.
Yes?
And it is the document substantiating the need for this project. So it speaks to the ETC, it speaks to the profit that Transnet would have expected to make at the time, in April 2013. It speaks to the the other benefits outside of 1064 that this project was expected to bring. I think it speaks to 68,000 new people employed and so forth. So there were other strategic benefits that this project was expected to bring, I think nationally, if that is the right word to use. So the business case basically puts a case for this acquisition of 1064 locomotives. It's essentially that.
Well, when you have to interrogate the business case, wouldn't that ordinarily mean, in the context, for example, of 1064, that you would also interrogate the issue of, has a case been made out for the need for 1064, which is the issue we dealt with earlier on. You said you didn't go that far because it seems to me on the face of it that ordinarily, if you are going to interrogate the business case, it should include whether there was a proper or justifiable need for that number.
So I agree with you, Chair. I think interrogate the business case would mean look at every aspect of the business. In other words, starting with the 1064 and determining if 1064 was the number of locomotives required.
Yes, what I'm saying is, as I understand the business case for this, what it means is you look at the justification that is advanced. Is that right? For the costs and the whole project.
Correct.
Yes. So what I'm saying is, on the face of it, it seems to me that one would expect that one of the things you would then interrogate is on what has been written in terms of the business case. Was there really a need? Was there a case made out for 1064 as opposed to 500, for example? So I'm just asking you whether, am I right to say ordinarily one would expect that when you interrogate the business case that would include that issue and not exclude it, but maybe in this case your mandate didn't require you to go into it?
You're correct. So the mandate did not require us to go into.
Yes, but if it didn't restrict you, you would go into that.
Correct.
Okay.
And if I may then just complete that, and in doing so, that would require of you to interrogate the rationale behind the MDS.
Correct, the projections made.
To then determine whether 1064 is a reasonable number under the circumstances contemplated in the MDS.
Correct.
And only thereafter, then you go into the business case, which is to look at the cost of what the 1064 is expected to cost.
Correct.
Chair, I think that brings us to your tea time.
Yes, we'll take the tea adjournment and resume at 11:30. We adjourn.
All rise.
how it is proposed the project would be financed?
No, not financed,
Yeah,
but it details how the revenue
that it will bring.
would come in, how the costs would be incurred over the foreseeable lifetime of the project. In this instance, it was about 36 years.
So it's about the revenue.
The revenue and the costs,
Yes,
the projection of those,
yes, okay, okay.
and bring all
Not-
those.
Not how it's financed is not part of the model.
So the
That would
financing,
be something else.
that's outside of this financial model.
Okay,
Because the business case itself also does not deal in detail with how the project was going to be financed. In other words, what portion, how the debt was going to be acquired.
okay.
So then, when you are requested to validate the business case of 38.6 billion, can you do so without knowledge of the particular financial model that is relevant to that business case?
The financial model is to a large extent the business case.
Yeah, so when you are
So
given
it-
the document, the business case, which you said you have annexed as AC2, without the financial model, are you able to validate that business case?
You cannot.
Okay, then we are now in the business case itself, relating to 1064. And you have indicated to the chair, as you stated 5.2, that this is developed on a platform, common platform, Microsoft Excel. And you have that on your system, and it's available to go on screen.
Correct.
Now, can you tell us specifically about what you now, this model which you refer to as a workbook? How is it made up? What does it contain? And how is it intended to be read? And perhaps it might assist if you show us that model.
It helps, Ms. Silva, if I know whereabout in the statement.
5.2, Chair, at page 8,
Oh, okay.
where I say he indicates that it is developed on a common platform called Microsoft Excel. Thereafter, you speak of the Excel-based model, the workbook comprising of a certain number of worksheets and the modeling that is involved.
Okay.
Would you like to talk to us about that?
I suppose it's easier to speak to it while projecting it.
Okay. Okay, we have it on the screen.
Okay, so Chair, what you have on screen is actually is what is termed the financial model. That's the Excel-based workbook. It has a number of sheets, and the sheets are actually represented by the tabs you see at the bottom. In fact, we can actually go through some of them. You can see the first one there, titled Boss Case Output. That's essentially the business case output.
I'm sorry, what page is it on this? Or is
Not
it
on the
not
screen. It will not be there, Chair. Instead, it is your annexure AC31
Which is at page?
at page 161 of the statement.
Okay. I
Now,
found
at
it.
AC31, we indicate that what we have submitted into evidence is the flash disk containing this entire financial model. Overleaf at, no, that's at 160, I apologize. At 161, we have given you a copy of what we call the first tab of the financial model, which is similar to what you have on screen. It's
Yes.
best, however, to work with the version at 161, which is the A3 page. And if you have reference to the A3 page, as Mr. Chabi intends to do, you'll be able to follow the various blocks in the in the Excel spreadsheet. Now, At page 157, Chair, of that statement, there's a picture of a USB. We didn't have another way of presenting it to you. We say that is the USB we are tendering as Annexure AC3. At
Okay.
page 157.1 overleaf, we developed an index showing what is contained in that USB. And what is contained there is the actual business case, which is the one document, and the second document is now the financial model.
Okay, thank you.
Now, at page 159, at 159, we have listed, let me take a step back. The whole of that model, financial model, is referred to as a workbook. The workbook is made up of a number of worksheets. And at page 159, we have identified each worksheet separately and what that worksheet contains. So that it's listed. There are in total 55 of them. You have in certain instances like tab 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 20, they are highlighted in yellow. Those are hidden worksheets. This is just so to understand what 159 is, but we will not be getting into that detail.
Yeah, okay.
So that was just to give you a sense of the structure of this financial model. Now, what Mr. Chabi has on the screen, if the chair would have regard to page 161, the A3 paper. That's what Mr. Chabi has on the screen. And if one has regard to what we have on the screen, that is the first tab under the heading Base Case Output. Okay. After the base case output is followed by a number of purple and is red other worksheets. And that is what makes up the actual calculation in respect of each item that was calculated to arrive at the 38.6 billion. Okay, we are now, Mr. Chabi, at the base case output, and you've turned us to that.
Okay. Thanks, Advocate. So, base case output, as you can see there, Chair, it's the first tab on that on the workbook. As the Advocate mentioned, there are a number of tabs thereafter. She's already spoken to this. There are 55 of these tabs, of which 6 are hidden. They are hidden because they actually do not feed into the model. Analysis were done on those sheets, but they did not. The output from those, there was no output from those sheets into this business case. So they're not relevant for purposes of this discussion. So we're looking at the first tab there, which is bus case output, which is short for business case.
You don't have something that you can use to point. That we can.
Well, I can hover.
So
Your mouse is on, you can use your mouse to
to
point
say this is
where
what
you
you
are
are
on the screen.
on now.
Right.
Yes.
There we go, Chair. Are you
If you move slower, perhaps.
able to pick up my mouse, Chair? Okay. So my mouse is there. That's bus case output. I've got it right where you've got the tab title.
It's very small.
It is. It's quite.
I don't know if it's
I
possible
guess there's
to
nothing we can
enlarge
do
the
about it.
mouse.
Yeah.
Is it possible?
Okay, we'll just do the best we can with what we have. It's okay.
Are you able, when dealing with any aspect of that spreadsheet, to perhaps highlight it? Okay, can you do that? as you deal with it, so we know where exactly you are on the spreadsheet.
Where I'm on the spreadsheet, I can select.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if the chair can follow as I select.
Yeah.
Are you able to follow the
The green line, yeah?
green?
Just that it would be better if, as you say, it could be highlighted or something, but if it can't be done, we'll make do with that small arrow.
the arrow, okay. I guess this is. Any suggestion?
We're trying to see if there's a technical way, but these are two lawyers advising each other.
Well,
It's very
maybe-
dangerous.
Maybe we can do with fresh ideas from,
From another lawyer. Okay. Now, the suggestion, Mr. Chabi, is, by way of example, let's look at your first entry under productivity MGTK, the first table. Let's say we want to speak about the existing fleet capacity. You see that?
Correct.
Are you able to click on that and highlight as we talk through it?
Like that?
That might help? Which is, okay.
that's much better.
So then we will do it as we go along.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right,
Please continue.
thank you.
And
So-
if you may do so that with reference to your statement starting at paragraph 5.4. So we'll read your 5.4 together with what you've projected on the screen, or in otherwise what we have at page 161 of the statement.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll just try and follow
Yes,
it here, but still cover what's covered in here.
absolutely. Thank
Okay.
you.
So bus case output, what you have before you, relates to what you would find in your business case document.
What should,
What you would find in your business case document. So in other words, AC2 in this instance,
Yes.
AC2, the actual business case, the document
Yes.
itself. So what's contained in that document would actually come from this tab that is titled bus case output. And in the statement I have highlighted, in fact, I have mentioned what exhibits each of those tables represent, what exhibits they are within the business case. If my recollection serves me right, I think productivity, MGTK, is exhibit 16 on page 29 of the business case.
Okay, just then let's find firstly at page 161 on the business case output productivity MGTK. On the screen which table is it?
I didn't get the question, Advocate.
At 5.4, you say the table titled productivity MGTK.
Correct.
Now you are dealing with that, and I would like you to identify, for purposes of our conversation, to identify it on the screen.
Okay, so that is the first table we have there on the screen, and I will highlight the whole table for the chair in yellow.
That's the table you refer to at paragraph 5.4.
Correct.
Okay? Then deal with that table.
Okay. So now this table, as mentioned, it's on page 29 of exhibit, and it's exhibit 16 on page 29 of the business case, which is the document. It
We don't need to go there at the moment, huh?
Sorry?
We don't need to
You don't
go to
need
that
to. It's
particular-
just
okay, thank you.
assisting you in terms of identifying where it is within the document.
Yes.
And assuring you that the financial model actually speaks to the business case.
Yes.
And pins the business case. This table models the volumes that would be transported each year by the locomotives and what would be required, in fact, what would be left off. So I will go line by line. As you can see there, the first row there, I will highlight that in red. The chair is still with us. And it speaks to the required capacity as per the market demand strategy. So,
And if I may then,
highlight
on
that.
that required capacity, it is broken down by year.
correct. And we can see here, it is projected from 2013 to 2022. So I'm still on that row. in the first year starting off at 86 million gross ton. So gross ton in this instance relates to the weight including the wagon itself, the weight of the wagon. So we talk of gross ton and we talk of net tons. Net ton is just the weight of the content, what the wagon is transporting. So essentially you have your MDS in the first row there, if you're following my cursor all the way. This table shows it only up to 2022, but it goes as far as 2051 if we look at the source of this information. The MDS volumes are actually modeled under volume MDS. So as not to lose you, Chair, I've gone back to bus case output. And if you follow my cursor, I am moving to the right under the different tabs, and I'm on volume MDS output. So that sheet titled volume MDS output models or projects what the market demand would be for the various commodities. You got commodities such as petroleum, you got manganese, you got chrome, iron ore. So everything that Transnet can expect to transport is modeled there. And the total of that is what you see there is MDS required volume in each of the various years. So 2013, you've got 86, apologies, sir, 86 million gross tons in 2013, 98, and so forth. So it's the total across all commodities that Transnet can expect to transport over the year, including the weight of the wagon, hence million gross ton. So it is in million. The line following that, so this is how the number of 1064 was arrived at. We've got existing fleet capacity. I will then highlight that in red again. If the chair's picked it up? Okay. All right. So that is existing fleet capacity. In other words, what the existing fleet at the time is able to absorb from the market demand. And we see there from 86 million gross ton kilometers, the existing fleet can only transport 79 million of that. And that tells you, because they can't absorb the entire market demand, or they can't service the entire market, there's still a need to acquire additional locomotives. I will skip written off. Written off is essentially what you lose from locomotives being written off. These locomotives had a lifespan of about 30 years. With modifications and additional work on them, they could be extended to about 45 years. However, in each year, there was a wreckage. So from that wreckage, you'd have lost, in 2013, 1.1 million from locomotives not being operational, being written off. In total, the required capacity, in fact, what would not have been transported in 2013 is about 8 million in 2013. I'll just highlight the row I'm referring to. That's the red row there. Okay. So about 8 million gross ton kilometers will not be transported in 2013 and so forth. So as mentioned, this was projected right up to 2051 to be able to arrive at a number for the locomotives required and model the revenue. We will look at that a bit later. So that is the first table. Not sure if there are any questions from the chair. Okay.
Okay, then the required capacity, the last line you have on that table, per annum, would be a correct understanding to say it indicates on an annual basis how much extra capacity is required?
Leftover, correct.
Yeah. Or shortfall?
Shortfall, not transported.
Not transported,
Yes.
So that is the demand that the MDS tells us we have to try and meet.
Correct, by acquiring locomotives.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But as mentioned earlier, sorry.
Go ahead.
As mentioned earlier, we would not, it was outside of our mandate to actually interrogate that MDS required capacity. Yes.
You accepted it as fact.
As fact,
for
yes.
purposes of your exercise. You have dealt now with the required capacity and the existing fleet capacity, and these you deal with at your paragraph 4.4 and 4.5 and 4.6.
I missed that, Advocate.
Come again?
I missed that.
I say at your 4.4 4.5 and 4.6, 5.6. Why keep I saying 4? I apologize. 5.5 and 5.6, including 5.7.
7, correct, yes.
Yes. So now you have in part dealt with the contents of that first table. Am I correct?
Correct, Advocate.
Okay. You now lead us at your paragraph 5.8 to a table titled New GFB Diesel Locomotive Plan.
So I must say the structure of this followed the exhibits within the business case. You're trying to identify those exhibits in the business case. So I will explain what that table is. I'll just start again, Chair. I'll just go back to the top. So to get to that table titled New General Freight Business Diesel Locomotive Plan, I have to scroll down the sheet. Okay. And I think, let me just highlight that Chair's attention. It's highlighted in yellow, Chair. So that is the table that you see there.
Yes.
And okay, I cannot pick up the exhibit number for this table in the business case. However,
No.
I will speak to it.
But then when you speak to it, because you have elected to highlight certain tables, please point out to the chair the relevance of highlighting this particular table.
Okay. So this table refers to the number of diesel locomotives out of the 164 that would be acquired and over what period they would be acquired. And you would have seen this in the business case, in the statement. Essentially, it tells us that 100 locomotives, as per the business case, would have been acquired by March 2014, because we know this business case started in April 2013, with 8 locomotives being acquired each month. Okay. To be exact, it's 8.33 for modeling purposes. So 100 were expected within the first year. The next 100 were expected within the year to follow, which is 2015, and so forth. In the final year, which is March 2018, 65 diesel locomotives were expected, totaling 465 over the delivery period. So this just explains the delivery period, delivery schedule of the diesel locomotives.
And the delivery period you have indicated was, at least on this business plan, 7 years.
It was 7 years,
From the date of-
2013 to the end of 2019.
Okay. May I proceed? You then deal with supply production capacity.
So if I can just for complete, I think just to complete the discussion, the table just beneath that relates to the electric locomotives. As can be seen, 65 as of March 2015, 130 thereafter, and 144 by March 2019 expected. So a total of 599 electric locomotives. The sum of the two gives you the 1064 locomotives.
You said in 14-15, it's 165, not 65. As
No,
regards
it's-
electric.
It's 65. In which year, sorry? By March 2015, 65 locomotives, electric locomotives would have been acquired.
Okay, yes, okay. My apologies. Yes, you're correct, 65.
So that is the delivery schedule, essentially. The combination of the diesel and the electric is what's termed the delivery schedule in the business case.
So if we look at those two tables, then we know that the diesel locomotives plan is for the acquisition of 465 diesel locomotives, and the electric locomotive plan is for the 599 electric locomotives
Correct.
delivered in those batches over a period of 7 years, and that gives us the total of 1064.
Correct.
Thank you.
In the statement, I speak about supplier production capacity. And I'll just scroll down here to the relevant table. Okay, it's actually the table following the electric locomotives table, and I'll highlight it in yellow. So that table, Chair, tells us how many locomotives would be delivered each month in the respective categories, in this instance, diesel and electric. As I mentioned earlier, 8 diesels were projected to be delivered each month over the delivery schedule. And for electric, you had 5 in the first year, moving up to 11, and then 12 in the final year. So these are the monthly deliveries expected. So I'm just, as mentioned earlier, explaining the exhibits within the business case.
Yes. So when we look at this table, it says supplier production capacity. Should the chair understand that to mean that speaks to the ability of each individual supplier
So
on a monthly basis?
on a monthly basis, correct.
Okay.
What the supplier is able to provide on a
Yes.
monthly basis, yes.
Okay.
Correct, so 8 for diesels and right through the delivery period, and for electrics, starting off at 5 into 11 and then ending off at 12.
Okay. Now, if one has regard then to the 3 tables as they follow each other, the diesel locomotive plan, the electric plan, and the supplier production capacity, the information set out in those tables, is it in any manner relevant to the period of the project, the period of acquisition?
Correct.
In any manner? Is it relevant to the fact that these were being acquired over 7 years?
It is. I think we can see there that you've got a 7-year period, roughly, because electric locomotives were to start in 2014 and diesels in 2013. I think if you overlap the two, you get roughly 7 years. So
Now-
it's between 6 and 5 years. 6 and 7 years, sorry.
We then can expect changes to occur if that period is brought down from 7 to, let's say, 3 or 4 or 5,
Changes
in the numbers per annum that are set out in these tables of locomotives.
well, that would be a function of the number of suppliers that you have.
Okay? It would be
This tells
influenced by
us
that.
the supplier is expected to provide you with 8 a month. It does not tell us whether that's the maximum they can provide in that month. If you
Okay.
have 2 suppliers for diesel, you can easily double
providing
that
4.
to 16 a month.
Okay. Thank you for highlighting that. At 5.10, paragraph 5.10, you deal specifically with the existing fleet
Okay, so that's
as at 2013, 2014.
correct.
Yes.
That's Exhibit 15 in the business case. At
Yes.
least that's been highlighted in the statement. And I will highlight the table for the attention of the chair.
And if we look at that, you have under fleet type, we need not really concern ourselves much about that 6E, 7E, all that relates to the type of locomotive.
Correct. And
So what the model does for us is to tell us, as at the time of development of this business model, how many 6Es, 7Es, and 7E1s were there?
Correct. So essentially, right up to, and if the chair is following, everything in yellow relates to electric locomotive stock at the time. So this is April 2013. So the number of electric locomotives that
Okay.
Transnet had,
Yes.
and that's a total of about 1,037. Okay, so summing up that column there, C. Sorry, let me just highlight that. In red, so what you have in yellow relates to the electric locomotives that Transnet had within its, I guess its stock. Okay, as at April 2013. And what you have in red are the numbers per type of locomotive. So 6E, they had 75 of those, and right down to the bottom, 18E, they had 597 of those. The total of that is 1,037. Everything thereafter, following, are the diesel locomotives. The total was 1,889 locomotives.
So what this then tells us that we had a total of 1,889 and we sought to augment that with a further 1064,
Correct.
basically, okay. You go further at 511, then you deal with a new tab or new table, GFB tariff average.
Okay.
Tell the chair about that.
Again, we speak to this because it's in the business case. I'll just highlight that for the chair's attention. So this is basically the tariff, the RAND tariff, that Transnet would charge to transport 1 million tons of whatever commodity they're transporting per kilometer. And we can see in 2013, they were looking at 42 cents, sorry. And that went up to 45 cents, 48. This actually goes up to about 3 rands, 80 or so when you look at the full table in the sheets to follow. But it's essential because it tells it's an essential component into the revenue that would be expected from the locomotives. You need the rand per gross ton per kilometer, and that's what we see there.
Okay? Then you follow that with the volumes, the net tons.
Correct. So now we're looking at net tons. I will highlight that again for the chair's attention. Also in the business case, in Annexure AC2. Now to explain this table, again, as I mentioned, this tells us where the 1064 locomotives came from. You've got the MDS target now. Here we're looking at net tons. This is excluding the weight of the wagon itself. And we can see from the market demand strategy, about 91 million tons were required in 2013. That was the demand from the market. The existing fleet could only transport 83 million of those tons. And given how the locomotives were to be acquired, we can see there is a shortfall of about, I guess, 8 million there. Okay, if you look at 91 and 83, the shortfall is 8 million. Okay, but the board decided, and if you look at the full continuous locomotives required, it was about 1,300 odd. But they decided instead of acquiring 1,300, we'd acquire 1,064. Given that these locomotives were spread out over the 7-year period, and we're expecting only 100 diesel locomotives, the additional capacity or tonnage that we could transport was 1 million, as can be seen there. So I'll just highlight that for the chair's attention. Okay, so from the 1,064 locomotives project, only 1 million of that shortfall of 8 would be catered by the 1,064. In 2014, this goes up to 7, but there's still a shortfall, as can be seen if you look at 104 versus 82. And that goes up to 21 and up to 77. That these locomotives would be able to transport. So the 1,000 locomotives did not absorb the entire, did not allow for the entire MDS to be met. I think there was still a shortfall, even though with the 1,064 locomotives on board. And that was a decision taken by the board. I guess being prudent that maybe the MDS might have been a little bit too optimistic. For a number, there may have been reasons that there are reasons, but we're not aware of those reasons.
What we've done now, you have chosen to highlight certain aspects of the financial model.
Correct.
Okay? And that has taken us to 5.12. Considering the various tables that we have highlighted and discussed, and in the context of what you stated, your paragraph 5.13, how would you describe these tables? What do they reflect, as opposed to the rest of the worksheets that you speak of at 5.13? You made a selection of these specific ones to deal with in particular. Why is that?
Okay. This was following the business case.
Yes.
But making this relevant to the discussion, looking at what the 1064 locomotives could transport, we can see the projections there being 1 in year I've highlighted that in red for your attention, Chair. So we have the volumes, the net tons that the locomotives could transport, we're expected to transport. 1 in the first year, 7 in the second year, 21, and so forth, up to 77. These volumes multiplied by the rate and the distance gives you the revenue. But I guess we'll address that a bit later. But that is the relevance of this table, to help you understand how the volumes fit into the revenue computation. So the revenue computation is essentially a function of your volumes to be transported, the distance over which those volumes will be transported, and the rent tariff per ton per kilometer.
Now, in dealing with the tables in the business case output, you did not discuss all the tables.
Correct.
And what is the reason for that?
I suppose because we'll elaborate on them later on.
And what do those tables deal with that you did not discuss?
They deal with net present value and the various costs. If you wish, advocates, we can actually touch on that.
No. I'm just trying to help us understand the rationale for the approach you have adopted.
Okay.
So you have excluded from the discussion currently any table or worksheet that deals with the revenue and the cost and the variables.
Correct.
And you have dealt with every other aspect that is relevant to the determination of the business case.
Correct.
Okay. And you say it's because we will deal in more specific terms with the variables and assumptions and the cost and the revenue.
Correct.
And the NPV. Okay. What we have discussed so far is by way of background, right? You
Correct,
agree with
okay.
me? Because it's only from paragraph 6 at page 12 that we turn to the your actual mandate. If one has regard to paragraph 2.1.1, where you have listed the mandate, you have sought to give a heading to each one of them for brevity. So at 2.1.1, you say you were required to assess the reasonability of the variables and assumptions used in the modeling of the 2013 business case.
Correct.
And this, for purposes of our discussion, if I read your statement correctly, you will deal with under the heading of review of the business case.
Correct.
And you have done that with every specific one, with every other mandate you were given.
Correct.
So then, going back to our page 12, paragraph 6, you deal then with the first, the review of the business case. So, and I'm sure we may safely close that Excel spreadsheet and deal more with words now.
Okay.
If we turn then to our paragraph 6.
All right, Chair.
I must confess, spreadsheets are not my favorite thing.
If it's any consolation, Chair, you are not alone in that.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I guess we're looking at the review of the business case in this instance, and we're tackling specifically the revenue and the cost components. The idea behind this is to give you, Chair, an understanding of what this business case is about, how they arrive at that net present value figure. So the components, I guess the sub-variables or the line items that make up cost and the line items that make up revenue. We have, to a certain extent, spoken about the line items that make up revenue. And those are essentially 3, but we'll get to that again shortly, just for completion.
Before you proceed, so that we are able to follow you, perhaps you might want to put up slide 3 and slide 4.
Okay.
Let's go to slide 3. At slide 3, you have 2 entries there. You have captured the mandate and you have captured the finding. Okay? And you indicate that your finding, which is what you told us previously, was that the assumptions in relation to the variables were found to be reasonable.
Correct, Advocate.
Now going to slide 4, would I be correct to say from this point onwards, you are providing an explanation and a substantiation for the finding you make at slide 3?
Correct.
Okay. Then we are all ears, Mr. Chabi.
Okay. So he's just trying to tie this in with the statement, I suppose.
Yes.
So in our assessment of the model, we found it to serve several purposes, and some of which to be assessing the profitability of the project, and this is in net present value terms. So this financial model helped transit officials to arrive at what they expected the profit to be, what the expected profit, at an expected profit figure, sorry. Okay. To determine what the estimated total cost of the locomotives would be. Okay, and I will speak to that. It is a component of the total costs of the project.
Let's try this again. If you move the mic a little further away from you, just move it to the furthest point with the file. Let me see how, with the file, move the file as well to the almost furthest point of the table. Okay, just speak and let me see
if that works.
how it is. I hope that those at the back, if they are disadvantaged, if you put the mic too far, they'll give me some indication. Okay, just speak and let me see.
We'll see from there, okay. All right, so the model served several purposes from our assessment of
Yes.
How is it for everybody? Is it fine? Oh, at the back they say it's fine.
Okay.
For you, Ms. Silo?
Very fine, Chair. I'm closer to him than they are.
Okay, all right. Let's do it that way and just raise your voice a little bit.
Okay. So it serves several purposes, some of which were to determine what the profit would be, the expected profit at the time, determine what the total cost of ownership of which ETC formed the part of, and we'll look at that shortly, and to better appreciate the risks of the project. And that comes through in the form of sensitivities being run on some of the variables and the assumptions. I think we'll touch on that as we look at some of the tabs.
Yes, I think this will work well as long as your voice is at the right level.
Okay.
The moment it goes down, it might not. So just bear that in mind. Okay.
And perhaps, I don't know if it is at all possible for Mr. Chabi, if he could speak slower, perhaps?
Yes,
if at all possible.
Maybe even that as well.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Yes, proceed.
All right, so those are the purposes that we felt were relevant for this statement, well, that we felt were important to discuss in this statement. And in assessing the profitability, the ETC, and assessing the risk, two key measures were applied in the business case. Net present value, we spoke to that. It is essentially the difference between the value in current terms of the revenue you expect and the value in current terms of the cost you expect to incur. It's just the difference, giving you a profit figure at the bottom. ETC, we've spoken to that, it's just the sum of the cost of the locomotives in each of the years. We looked at the schedule. I must run myself to slow down. And we had 100 locomotives as at March 2014. So it's simply the cost of those 100 locomotives plus the cost of the next 100 and so forth right up to 2018. Similarly for electrics, and that sum gives you the ETC, the simple summation of costs of acquiring those locomotives. I also mentioned earlier, those costs included, it wasn't just the locomotive price, you had escalation costs in there. Locomotive today at price X would cost you something else in a year's time. So you had to account for inflation in there. Exchange rate impacts is all you had to account for that within that cost. And you also had contingencies, but I guess we'll look at the detail a bit later.
You, then at slide 5, at slide 4, you're talking about the measures applied in appraising the business case. At slide 5, you then talk to us about the variables making up revenue as per the business case and the variables making up cost as per the business case.
Correct.
So if you could deal with those.
Okay. So we've looked at 3 sub-variables, or should I say line items, making up revenue in this instance. We looked at the distance to be traveled each year by each locomotive, the volumes to be transported by each locomotive. We also looked at the rent tariff per locomotive, per million ton, per kilometer. Your revenue is essentially the product of that. You take what you expect to transport in that particular year, multiply it by the distance, and multiply it by the rent tariff. And that is done right through to 2049. So it was a 36-year projection period allowed for in this project where revenue is concerned. I think just to speak a bit about the escalation in the rent tariffs, they started off at 42 cents, we saw that up to 48. The average escalation rate of that rent tariff, so each year the rent tariff was escalated just to keep in line with inflation. On average, it was about 6.12% over the entire over the 36-year period. A little higher over the initial period, I think ranging between 6 and 8%, but then stabilizing at about 6%. Okay, which is a reasonable assumption to make when you're projecting revenue.
And if I may just clarify, that escalation rate you speak of, you derive from the financial model?
Correct.
Okay.
It's what I read in the financial model.
That's fine. You may continue. And now we deal with the variables making up the costs of the business.
I think just to touch a bit on the incremental volumes in this, in fact, incremental volumes, just volumes expected from 1064. We already saw starting off at 1 up to 77. It actually peaked at 89, and that's when you had your entire fleet of 1064 locomotives. Okay, with 1064 locomotives, you were expected to transport about 89 million tons of commodities. It then tapers off at the end as your locomotives are written off, because these locomotives have a 30-year lifespan. So I guess.
Okay.
The distance was on average about 550 kilometers a year. And that's derived from historical figures, what has been observed from the existing locomotive fleet.
Relating to slide 5 now, what you've just done is talk to the should I say left side of the slide, which are the variables making up the revenue. Now let's talk about the variables making up the cost.
The cost. So under cost, here we had a number of variables, and you can see them overhead on the slide. The first one being TCO, the total cost of ownership, of which ETC formed a part of. You also had wagon cost, because the locomotive only refers to the head, the engine of the train. You had infrastructure costs. This is essentially what you had to lay out to operationalize the trains, and then you had overhead costs, so there's certain costs as a business that you incur that are fixed regardless of the volume of business that you take on. And that was derived from the financial statements, and you had tax costs. So these were the cost items actually modeled as part of this project. Now, moving into the total cost of ownership. We mentioned in TCO, we had the capital acquisition cost of the locomotive, and that was the ETC. In addition to ETC, and this is still part of total cost of ownership, you had the fuel costs, you had the personnel costs, you had insurance costs, you had emission costs for diesel and electric locomotives. So you had the same across diesels and across electrics. So those various costs, and just trying to locate myself.
Perhaps before you jump too far ahead in your statement, because we have just gone through the variables making up the revenue and the variables making up the cost, and you told us about the measures applied in appraising the business case. Maybe we must talk to what you stated, your paragraph 6.4, which is that the main measure used to appraise the business case was the net present value. So now you have told us what you have taken into consideration in order to appraise the net present value. And if you go to slide 6, that's where you set them out in tabular form, and you put values to each one of them.
Correct.
And it is in that table that you deal with your diesel TCO and your electric TCO. So you may talk to us per line item.
Well slide 6. Okay.
Yes.
So, Chair, as you can see from the slide speaks to what the expected present value was at the time. The net present value, and a value of 2.7 billion rands was expected at the time from this project.
Can I, sorry to interject, can I put it in simple terms and say net present value of 2.7 billion is the profit?
Correct.
So that's the expected profit on this entire project?
Yes.
Over the period?
We can adopt that terminology,
Okay.
yes. Okay. So I'll just refer to it as the profit expected as of April 2013. And that came to about 2.7 billion rands. Now I'll take you through the various cost items just to give you an idea of how the 2.7 was arrived at. If you look at the revenue component in that slide, revenue made up 109 billion. So over that projection period, that 36-year period, the value of the revenue expected as of April 2013 was 109 billion rands. I think when you look at the profit of 2.7 as a percentage of that, you're looking at about 2.5% profit. So that tells us that the costs were quite high as well. If you look at the diesel TCO, that's the total cost of ownership attributable to diesel locomotives, and that TCO includes ETC. And if I recall right, the ETC component was only 8 billion of that 22 billion that we see there. So diesel TCO was about 22 billion in present value terms. Electric TCO was about 21 point, also in the region of 22 billion. However, the ETC relating to electric was slightly higher, about 4 billion. I think we'll look at that diesel a bit later. Wagon costs.
Before you get there, now those, the diesel and the electric TCO, the costs, is it a correct understanding that these are the costs I would have to incur to own and operate, or just to own their locomotives?
We're referring to TCO in this instance.
TCO.
So to own and operate.
It's own and operate.
Correct.
So if I'm going to buy a certain number of locomotives at a particular rate, taking all the variables into consideration, I'm calculating, you're saying it's calculated over the period in order for me to make my 2.7 billion profit, it's the total cost of my owning and operating those diesel locomotives is going to come in at 22 billion.
Correct.
For which I must deduct from the revenue.
Yes.
Okay. And I must do the same for the electrics as well.
Correct.
Thank you. You may proceed.
As mentioned, in this point, with diesels, we only dealt with the locomotive. Wagons were required. I think it's a total of about 16,500 wagons required to operationalize the 1064 locomotives. And those came in at a cost in present value terms of about 12 billion.
Okay.
There were infrastructure costs as well. I assume this would relate to the railing, the electrics, and so forth. Those came in at about 18.5 billion rands. And your overhead cost is about 24 billion rands. Tax at about 7.7 billion rands, giving us a profit position of about 2.7 billion. So despite a large revenue figure expected, we also had large costs associated with the project. Hence the statement that ETC made up a very tiny component of the cost of this project. In fact, when we look at the figures, it was only about 47% of the TCO costs and only about 20% of the overall costs.
Now, at your slide 6, you arrive at this NPV of 2.7 based on what you call a hurdle rate. You have to take a hurdle rate into consideration.
The business case arrives at, yes.
Oh, the business case. You is not directly you, Mr. Chabi, I apologize, you're quite correct. The business case. Now, can you talk to us about the hurdle rate, which is what you refer to at the top of that slide, where you say the present value computation based on a hurdle rate of 18.56%.
Okay.
And if I may, while you're thinking, is it the rate discount rate?
The risk discount rate,
The
correct.
risk discount rate, then you talk about that as well, and you help us distinguish the one from the other.
Okay. We spoke about valuing cash flows in present value terms. The present value of the revenue, the present value of the cost. Present value simply means bringing back the cost by a certain factor, a certain discount rate. I think to put it very simply, and maybe I'll come back to this, if you expect to invest 100 rands and get 10 in the first year, 10 in the second year, and 110 in the third year, you're looking at a discount rate of about 10% to get you back to the 100. Okay? I think when we get to IRR, I'll explain how that 10% relates to IRR as well. Now, Transnet has what they call, a WACC and hurdle rate policy. And that policy determines what the hurdle rate should be for two types of projects: greenfields projects and brownfields projects. Greenfields projects are projects that Transnet has never undertaken before. And as you'd expect, the discount rate, the hurdle rate, let me stick to hurdle rate at this point for now, would be higher for a greenfield project compared to a brownfields project. I think if we take a simple analogy of a site with nothing but grass, there's a lot more work to be done to get that site to be operational, to serve its purpose. A brownfields project, at least you got brown bricks, so you got somewhere to start off from. The risk is a lot lower because you're starting your project at a different stage. So the construction stage is off the table. At the time, Transnet's policy on the hurdle rate was 18.56% for greenfields projects. And I think brownfields, I cannot remember, probably about 2% lower, but that needs to be verified. Now, what is a hurdle rate? A hurdle rate is a rate of return that the organization wants to make on any greenfields project that it will invest in. So in other words, it will look at the return expected from the project, and if that return does not meet the hurdle rate, they're not interested. They'll simply put aside. To arrive at that rate, you look at a range of factors, your capital providers. In other words, how much of your project is being financed by debt, and what is the cost of that debt. In this case, at arriving at that hurdle rate, the cost was about 7.31%. So that's the weighted of all the various debt structures that Transnet would have had to employ. The capital coming through, what return do we want on that capital? It was about 16.58%. Okay. So it will cost you an average about 12% if you combine the 7 and the 16 for the capital to embark on this project. So your hurdle rate has got to be at least that cost of capital. In this instance, given that we're dealing with a greenfields project, one that Transnet has never undertaken before and has no experience in undertaking, a rate of 18.56 was applied, which is quite a high rate considering the 12 that we're looking at. That's a 6% margin addition to the cost of capital in this instance. Now, that is just a target rate. In other words, we've got 6 greenfields projects. We're only going to undertake in 3 because only 3 give us a return of at least 18.56%. That's how you use the hurdle rate. To be able to make that decision, you've got to compute what's called an internal rate of return. That's simply the return that you expect from the project. Going back to my initial example of 100, that's a typical government bond, for example. In this instance, you put in 100, you expect 10 as a coupon in the first year, another 10 the second year. It's an example of another 110 at the final stage. So that's your capital plus your 10% interest. The IRR, or internal rate of return in this instance, is 10%. It is that 10% that you would compare to your hurdle rate. So you might say, well, I want to invest 100. I'm going to borrow the 100, but how much does it cost me to borrow the 100? It costs me 8%. I would set my hurdle rate at 9%. If my investment does not give me at least 9%, I'm not interested. In this instance, my IRR from this investment is 10, so it meets my investment criteria, my hurdle rate of 9. So I will invest the 100 that I borrowed into this project, make my 10% and pay off the 9%. So that's hurdle rate and IRR. Now, the risk inherent in this investment of 100, 10, 10, 10, 110 is a different risk altogether. You've got to undergo a detailed risk assessment to understand what that risk discount rate should be. So looking at government bonds and the profile I've just given you, and equities. You might expect the same cash flow stream from a government bond and equities. However, I think we can both agree that the risk profile is totally different between equities and government bonds. So the risk discount rate that you'd apply on this stream of cash flow is different to the risk discount rate you'd apply on this stream of cash flows from equities. And that requires you to undergo a detailed risk assessment of both investments to arrive at the risk discount rate. In this instance, Transnet chose to apply the hurdle rate as its risk discount rate. I guess it's later on we will speak about our view on that rate. We were happy with it given the process that they underwent to arrive at that 18.56%. It was evidence-based, looking at companies locally and abroad. I think we looked at about 160 companies to arrive at a premium over the weighted average cost of capital, which is what your shareholders want, an average of the cost of your shareholder capital and your debt holder capital cost. So we're happy with the 18.56%, but essentially that is what the 18.56% is. It is Transnet's hurdle rate, which is also their risk discount rate for this project.
Okay. Is it coincidental that they both happen to be 18.56?
Is it coincidental?
Yeah, is it just a matter of coincidence that they are both 18.56, both the hurdle rate and the risk discount rate?
Well, I'd like to believe a detailed risk assessment was done. My understanding is that the 18.56 was actually derived from this 1064 project.
Okay.
So it was a study of that project to arrive at the hurdle rate.
Now, you say the hurdle rate used here is 18.56. Was that a prescribed rate, and if so, by what? Or is that a rate that is randomly used in the business case? Where does the 18.56% derive from?
Well, there's a policy to that effect, the WACC and hurdle rate policy.
That's what prescribes what the applicable hurdle rate will be.
For the various projects, be it brownfields or greenfields.
No. So now this being greenfields, it had to be 18.56. So it was not open to whoever was working on the business case to decide that they are going to use a hurdle rate of 12.
No.
It wasn't. It was a prescribed rate. Okay. From your paragraph 6, now we understand how you arrive at the net present value. And let me just check. At this point, you, by you, I mean all five, having done your investigations, you don't take issue with the treatment of all these costs to determine the net present value.
We were happy with the approach taken in modeling the costs. We had certain views, I suppose, on the way the tax asset was treated, and by tax asset in this case I mean if you have a loss in 1 year, you can carry it over, and I think the taxation rules at this point allow you to carry it over for 5 years. In the model, it was done for 1 year, which is a very conservative approach. In other words, we're deciding not to carry this thing for 5 years, but for 1 year, and that has the effect of reducing your present value. So we accepted the approach.
Would it have the effect of reducing the NPV significantly, or
Well, had they done it over 5 years, it would have increased the NPV.
would have increased it?
Yes.
So are you suggesting this was a more stringent approach?
It was a more conservative approach, yes, being, I guess,
So
I suppose pessimistic,
a different treatment may have resulted in a higher NPV?
in a higher profit, yes.
So because now they employed a conservative approach, came out with a lesser NPV, you are happy to accept that?
We're happy to
There are no
accept,
real
yes.
issues there. From your then paragraph 6.7, you say the second measure is the ETC. Right? And you make the point, as your slide 6 shows us, that the project was profitable at an ETC of 38.6 billion. You see
Correct.
that? Now, you can take it from there, and just to give you guidance, if we go over at slide 7 at some point, that might be a slide that is relevant to the next issues you are going to discuss.
Oh. Okay.
Okay?
I think it's, we should now let's address the slide, I suppose.
Yes.
So Chair, this slide essentially is a sensitivity test on the discount rate and its impact on the net present value. We spoke about the weighted average cost of capital, in other words, the average of what shareholders would cost for the capital and what your debt holders would cost for what they will provide you as capital. The average of that, for this case, was 12.56%. Again, that's towards the end. Starting off at the far end of the slide, 12.6%. At 12.6%, if 12.6% was used as the risk discount rate, this would have produced a profit, net present value, of 34.1 billion. You drop that by 1%, you increase that by 1%, so you move up from 12.6 to 13.6, your profit drops to 26.2. Now, this is indicative of an increase in the level of risk. If you increase the risk discount rate, it's synonymous with you assuming that the risk of the project has increased. So I want to discount my cash flows by a higher rate, and that is the effect of lowering your profit. The objective of this slide is to show you how exponential this profit, the distribution of this profit is. And if you look at that, it drops exponentially. So, and I think in the statement I do mention, I can just get back to those specific numbers. I can't find them, but essentially the difference between 2.7 and 5.9, I think is about, 3.2 billion. If you look at the next difference between 5.9 and 9.7, I think you're looking about roughly 4. So that difference increases with a drop in the discount rate. So the exponential, the difference keeps increasing, an upward sloping profit position there as you drop the discount rate by 1%.
So we know from what you informed us that at 18.5% hurdle rate, there was a profit of 2.7 billion.
Correct.
You increase that hurdle rate by 1%, and you wipe out all profit.
Yes, and that's essentially your internal rate of return.
To 19.6.
Correct.
Yeah.
So just a 1% increase in that risk discount rate would have wiped out your profit of 2.7 billion in this instance.
And that hurdle rate would only drop the less risky the project was. So you would use, let's say, a 17.6, right down, let's say, to 12, depending on the risk profile of the project.
Correct. So the risk discount rate would drop with a decrease in risk. Yes, that's what you would expect to see.
And as it decreases, then it gives you more profit.
Correct.
Which what you calculate at 12.6% would have given a profit of 34 billion.
Yes.
Now, there's a significant difference or change between the rate at 13.6 and 12.6. It's so that reflects. Does that give a true sense of the value of that 1% difference in the hurdle rate? It doesn't impact the 1% change has.
Sorry?
It's the impact the 1% change of the
has.
hurdle rate
Correct.
has on the
Correct.
projected profit.
And that impact increases as you drop the discount rate.
Okay. You make a point about the ETC and what the ETC establishes and what doesn't establish, what it considers or doesn't consider. And you say the estimated total cost speaks purely to cost and does not consider revenue, and therefore is not a measure to determine profit.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And you mentioned that it is inappropriate, therefore, to have regard to the ETC only in order to determine the profitability of the project.
Correct.
Why are you pointing this out to us in particular?
I point that out because there seemed to have been an overemphasis on ETC at the expense of the profitability of the project.
There seems to have been where?
Sorry?
At where was this? Please be more specific. You speak in general terms that there seems to have been.
So I suppose starting with the mandate, that
Yeah.
we should check the ETC. And having looked deeper into the business case, we realized actually the ETC only makes up 20% of the costs. The project is a lot bigger than this ETC that we're referring to. The memorandum, I think, a bit later as we'll come to it.
Yeah, for the record, tell us again what memorandum this is.
The 23 May 2014 memorandum speaks of
Okay.
an increase in ETC, and that is the headline on that memorandum. The board might have wanted to look beyond the ETC and look at the profitability of the project, and that seems to have been addressed in 1 or 2 paragraphs, whereas ETC made up the remaining 80-odd paragraphs.
And that memorandum is the memorandum to the board of Transnet at the time, on the 23rd of May, thereabouts 2014, seeking approval for the increase of the ETC from 38 billion to 54 billion. And you are saying in that memorandum there seems to have been an overemphasis on ETC.
And justifying the ETC.
In justifying the
In
ETC.
justifying the increase in the ETC, yes.
And your view is that less attention was given to the profitability of the project,
Correct.
to the totality of the project. Okay. You then lead into your paragraph 6.8, and you talk about what you must address in order to determine the financial viability of the 1064 transaction. You see that?
I do.
Okay. Can we deal with that in brief? And we are now dealing, I think, specifically with your variables.
So we have discussed this.
We have discussed this in reference to the slides. Yes, that would be slide 5, which is the slide that was dealing with revenue and variables making up revenue and costs.
Correct. I think the one part we have not discussed is 6.83, which is the view on the assumptions made to the variables.
Sorry, I didn't hear that. I misheard. Please say that again.
So looking at that,
Yes.
6.8.1 has been dealt with,
Yes,
which is relates to the revenue and costs
yes.
in the business case. The net present value of 2.7 billion has been
We've dealt
addressed.
with that.
The reasonability of the assumptions in relation to ETC has not yet been addressed.
Okay. Then perhaps let's deal with that. Perhaps before we do, Mr. Chabi, we have dealt with the volumes,
We have.
which you deal with at 7.2. We've dealt with the distance, the tariffs, the costs. You recall where we dealt with total cost of ownership, wagon cost, and the like. We must deal with the total cost of ownership before you express an opinion on the reasonability of the assumptions, shouldn't we? The total cost of ownership, what you
Correct.
deal with from your paragraph 7.6.
Okay. Okay,
Before you express an opinion on the reasonableness of the assumptions, we
Correct.
must deal with some of these aspects.
that is
yes.
correct. Okay.
And that, Chair, you'll find at page 16, starting at paragraph 7.6.
Yes, I've got it.
So, Chair, starting off at paragraph 7.6, this looks at the total cost of ownership. I think we have dealt with this in some detail, highlighting what the costs were, but we did not speak specifically to the ETC component, although we did allude to it earlier on. And the ETC in this instance looked at the capital of acquiring the cost of acquiring the locomotive, so the price per locomotive. There was a 2% localization premium in the business case added to the price to allow for the likelihood of the locomotive manufacture locally being higher than that abroad. I think reasonably so. So ETC was the price, the localization premium, also included inflation, so escalation in the price over the various years, also included And that's escalation or inflation locally and abroad, because a part of these locomotives were to be manufactured. There was a foreign component to it and there was a local component to the locomotive. So different inflation or escalation rates will apply on these locomotives. We also had a foreign currency risk hedging cost, a forex cost, and we had contingencies. So those are the elements that made up ETC in this business case. And as mentioned, ETC made up from the part of total cost of ownership. Now, how was ETC, and I'm not sure if we should actually address this now, how the ETC was modeled, or much later. I can go through the modeling process quickly, or should I say the derivation of 38.6, or leave that for later?
Let's leave that for later.
For later, okay. So just to give you a brief explanation of starting off with diesels. So the price assumed for diesel locomotives in the 2013 business case was $2.6 million, and 3.5 for electrics. 50% of that 2.6 million was to be borne locally. So that's $1.3 million. Okay. So $1.3 million worth of locomotive, if I can use that term, was to be manufactured in South Africa. $1.3 million worth of locomotive was to be manufactured overseas. In this instance, we're looking at the US, given that we're dealing with the US dollar price. The foreign component of the locomotive, the $1.3 million, would be escalated, as you would expect, by foreign escalation, using foreign escalation rates. And what was assumed in this instance was about 2.3% a year escalation. The local component of the $1.3 million would be escalated because that's is in rents using local inflation indices or rates. I think that's a better term to use. And they were, I think the rate was between 5.3 and 5.7% over the period, or 5.9%. Okay. So we can see that the inflation rates are materially different in this instance. The economies are different. They're subject to different economic conditions. So you can expect those changes in prices to differ between the two economies. So to arrive at the price for the diesel locomotive in year one, what the model did is to assume the $2.6 million price did not escalate that in that year. However, used for the foreign component, because that had to be hedged, and we will demonstrate that there was hedging in a short while, the forward rate for the dollar in a year, and I think at that point it must have been 9.582 or something to that effect. So the foreign component, of course, to convert that amount to rand terms had to be multiplied by 9.5 rands to the dollar to arrive at a rand price for that foreign component. And
that was the exchange rate at the time?
That was the exchange rate applied at the time.
Yes.
Okay. And the rest, of course, was just to the local component. Of course, you had to add the 2% premium to that. The sum of those factors gave you the rent price in that year, and I think that was about 25.2 million. Let me just check that.
You deal with, just look at your 7.6.4.1. You give it in dollar terms at 2.6 million for diesel and 3.5 for electric locomotives.
Correct, okay. Yeah, so that gave us a total of 25.2 million rands per locomotive, diesel locomotive in 2013. And
at an exchange rate of 9.58.
9.58 odd.
Okay.
The same process was followed for the years to follow. However, the rent component was escalated, as mentioned, at the local rate of inflation, the foreign component at the foreign rate of inflation. And whatever that amounted to in year two, you would take the $1.6 million, escalated by 2.3%, and then that figure is what you then hedge, multiply at the forward rate in year two. The combination of that gives you a price, and that price was 26.7 million rands in 2014.
Per locomotive.
Per locomotive.
And that is what you have to hedge.
No. So this already includes the hedging cost.
It also already includes the hedging
Correct.
cost.
So the 26, it's a rand amount, and it's a combination of the local component in
And
rand
the foreign
terms and the foreign component in rand terms, allowing for the 2% localization premium.
Allowing for two, yes.
Correct.
So if it were to be set out in an Excel spreadsheet, you say you are looking at the initial capital outlay, the acquisition cost, right? Would it be correct to say in that acquisition cost, the chair should expect to be able to locate the base price of the locomotive, the localization premium? I'm looking at your paragraph 7.6.2.
Okay.
The escalations to the price, the hedging costs,
Yes.
and contingencies,
Correct.
and the cumulative of all that is what's going to tell me what the acquisition costs, the pure acquisition costs are,
Well, it's going to tell you what the ETC is.
what the ETC is.
Correct.
Yes, okay. Overleaf. What you've just dealt with was an example, was the diesel locomotives, and the same process is repeated for electric locomotives, which is what you deal with at page 17.
Okay.
Are you
Correct.
still with me? Correct? Okay. And if you look at your paragraph 7.6.10, at page 18, there is your 9.1285. That was your spot rate, that exchange rate, as at April 2013.
Correct. So
What is the source of that exchange rate? What is your source of that exchange rate that you have reflected here?
well, that's the business case, the financial model.
The
So
financial
all
model,
of this derives from the financial model.
these figures.
Correct.
And equally so, then the forward rates as set out immediately below that at page 18, looking at 2014, 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, all those derive from the financial model.
Correct.
And it is applying those various rates amongst others that eventually, to the original locomotive price, that will eventually lead us to the 38.6 billion.
Correct. Applying these rates, allowing for inflation and all the other variables.
Yes, absolutely. The contingencies. From paragraph 19, you deal with the detail of the cost.
Paragraph 19.
You said from
Page-
paragraph?
Page 19.
Yeah.
Too many P's, I apologize, Chair. For the record, from your page 19 of your statement, you then unpack the various costs, the personnel costs, fuel costs, maintenance costs.
So those are still the costs making up TCO, the
Yes.
total cost of ownership.
Yes.
Correct.
And that detail we have dealt with in part previously.
We have.
We don't have to worry about. So now, we have taken into consideration all the assumptions.
Well, I think it is important to mention one thing, Advocate, the maintenance
Yes.
costs. 'Cause
Maintenance
We've got
costs?
two different tables, two different forex rates within the business case.
Okay, take us through that.
Now,
Talk to us to that.
we felt it important to speak about the various exchange rates found in the business case, because the mandate was, tell us if hedging is included in 38.6, hedging costs are included in the 38.6 billion or not. We came across hedged forward curves, okay, for foreign currency hedging, and we also came across forecasts. And those forecasts are what we have under the maintenance cost, and we have them specifically under maintenance cost because forecasted rates were only applied in projecting maintenance costs. And that is the only instance where we saw forecasted rates being applied in the business case. Everywhere else, it was the forward curve.
And we will get to the relevance of what you point out later.
Later.
When we're talking about the treasury forward, the treasury curve rate. For now then, we've considered the variables and assumptions that underpin the ETC.
We have.
Okay. And you summarize these at your slide 8.
Okay.
And having taken us through that detail, are you now in a position to express a view as regards the reasonability of these assumptions?
Correct. So a lot of these costs were escalated, well, the ETC, the locomotive prices, the local component of the locomotive prices was escalated using SA, producer price indices. It is undoubtedly the right index to use, given that you're looking at manufacturing goods. Okay, locomotives in this instance, not CPI, but PPI.
Yes.
We're happy with the fact that the variable itself was PPI. It's the appropriate index to use. The assumptions used in the business case at the time was around 6% going forward, and I think 5.7 to 5.9 in the initial period. We're also happy with those assumptions, I think largely considering what it had been in the past. And looking at the 5-year period preceding, that was about 3.6%, and the 10-year period preceding, that was about 5.6%. We felt that the assumptions made in the business case were pretty much in line with what we had observed historically and where it was likely to go.
If you could go to slide 9 then. You show us a graph there
Oh, sorry, that's
that reflects,
that's US now.
that's US,
So we're still speaking about SA.
that's still, oh, the SA,
SA.
okay.
Correct, yes. On the foreign currency, and I think we'll still get to that, discuss that a bit later, but we simply state that those rates were forward curve rates. So hedging costs were allowed for, and we'll unpack that later. The federal rate, we spoke about that. It was a 6% margin over the weighted average cost of capital. It's quite a high margin, especially considering that the cost of equity used to arrive at the WEP was about 16%. So you look at an additional 2% over the cost of equity for this type of project. It's a high-risk project, given that Transnet had never undertaken this type of project before. A rate of 80.56 was considered acceptable. Also considering that it was evidence-based, looking at a number of companies, not just locally but abroad, about 160.
How many?
About 160 companies.
160, yeah.
That's what the research speaks to. So we consider that 80.56% as a reasonable discount rate to use in discounting the cash flows in the model. On the US side, we had it was a bit concerning that the financial model applied CPI as opposed to PPI. Because we thought, okay, these are locomotives, okay, they're not consumer goods, they are producer goods. They'll be affected by producer price changes rather than consumer price changes. We then looked at the correlation between CPI in the United States and PPI, and the correlation, as you can see, there was very, very high and positive for that matter. I mean, CPI and PPI in the US, they pretty much track each other, as can be seen from the graph. We also find that for the most part, US CPI led US CPI in that it's set above US PPI. I guess it was slightly higher, and I think when we look at the average going back, it was about 3.6 compared to 3.3. 3.6 being that of the United States, and 3.3 being that of, being that of CPI, and 3.3 being that of PPI. So we're happy with US CPI because, again, that implied a certain level of conservation, I suppose, being a little pessimistic around the price of the locomotives going forward. So at least the incentive was not to push this project through when you look at the business case, but to be very conservative when presenting to the board and say, listen, it's 2.7 billion rands, and we have, where we could, applied margins to our assumptions to allow for any additional risk that might have crept in, that could creep in, that we did not allow for in our, either via insurance or in the risk discount rate.
And the purpose, before I get to the purpose, slide 9 is what you produced. It doesn't come from the business case, it doesn't come from...
Oh yeah, correct. So this was sourced from, I think this is trading economics.
Yes.
But this
is what you sourced.
This is market data.
Yes, and the purpose was to see how the correct rate, which ought to have been the US PPI, related over the period to the US CPI.
Correct.
And the takeout from that slide must be that the differences between the two indices is
Negative.
slight. It's a slight difference, And the use of the US CPI did not unduly inflate or reduce the ETC. So
It served to increase it slightly,
it served to increase it, but ever so slightly.
yes.
So if using US CPI, we come in at 38.6 billion, looking at your graph, what would you say would perhaps have been the right ETC using the PPI?
Use PPI, you wouldn't expect to come any lower than 38.4 billion.
So 38.4 as against their 38.6. And what opinion do you express on that, the fact that they used the wrong index?
Well, I won't say they used the wrong index, but they're probably trying to be more prudent and conservative.
Okay.
We're happy with 38.6
Okay.
as an ETC.
So then now that we have looked at this variable, this particular issue, the inflation issue, both local and foreign,
And foreign, yes, sorry.
are you then in a position now to express a view on the reasonableness of the assumptions made in determining the ETC?
Well, I think, I guess there's another slide that we looked at, another sensitivity that we ran, and this speaks to, and I mentioned this, well, I'm not sure if I did, but local content as well was a variable in this sense. It's varied from diesel to electric. We look at the DTI requirements that the business case speaks to, the 60-40 for electrics and the 55-45 for diesel. 60% required local content on the electrics end and 55% local content required on the diesel end. However, the business case modeled this ETC on a 50-50, on an assumption of 50 locally and 50% abroad. We try to assess the impact of this, and we found the impact to be negligible here as well. I think if you move away from a 50% local content and you assume 60% local content, the impact on the price is a drop in the ETC, as can be seen. It's pretty much the same, 38.6 billion compared to 38.555 billion.
So it's a 2 billion rand difference.
So it's in our view, a negligible difference. That negligible in the sense that it would
No,
not
not
invalidate.
my apologies, my calculation, it's lunchtime.
Sorry?
So my calculation is entirely wrong. It's the hour. I said the difference between the two is negligible. They are both 38 billion,
38.6.
yeah.
Correct.
And just that the other one is 0.55 and the other is 6, so yes.
Correct. So
You can see
moving to
how
60, correct, would have actually reduced the ETC and increased the net present value, as can be seen, from 2.739 to 2.75 billion. And that's what the impact of an increase or a change in that assumption would have done to this business case.
Okay.
You didn't realize we have gone
I was
beyond
hoping
1
we
o'clock.
wouldn't go much. I just wanted him to, this is, I think, the last point, to conclude
Yes, okay, do that.
on his first mandate then.
Okay. So I suppose in conclusion, we're happy with the mechanics of the model. In other words, how the model actually modeled, projected, and discounted the cash flows. We're happy with the variables employed within the model, the assumptions made out around those variables, of course, within the context of our mandate. One variable being the number of locomotives, which we did not interrogate, we took as is. We're also happy with 38.6 billion ETC. And I'm not sure if this is the point where we answer if it includes all the other, but
No.
No, so that's
We're
at the
not
much
there
later
yet.
stage, yes.
Thank you, Chair. Then, if we may, apologies.
Yes, we'll take the lunch adjournment and resume at 2:05.
Thank you, Chair.
We adjourn.
All rise.